Hey, I'm J.R. Lay. Welcome back to another episode of the Level Up Business Podcast. In this episode, we're going to explore how you can not just lead, but also live with authenticity by leveraging your genius as an entrepreneur. More importantly, we're going to learn how to get back that genius. If you feel like you've lost it, you can get back that genius through conflict. But first, I'd like to invite you to get a copy of my best-selling book, Banking on Change. It is the leader's guide to unlocking and achieving exponential growth in the age of AI. Text me, 832-240-1922, and I will text you a copy so that you can level up your mind, so that you can level up your business and your life. Now, joining me for today's conversation is Matthew Abrams. He is a certified EOS Implementer, Entrepreneurial Operating System Implementer, and Coach. Welcome to the show, Matthew. It is good to share time with you today, and I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation around conflict because it is one that we tend to avoid, but if we can lean into it, what can we find?
Love it. Thanks, JR. So good to be here with you. Yeah, so, we were talking before we got on air, and this notion of going into the shadows, going into the places that feel uncomfortable, that's where life expands. That's where we expand as humans. And there's actually a chapter in this book that I'm writing about edges and how might we explore the edges within ourselves, the edges within our relationships, and how do we lean into that? So most of us stay in this comfort zone. We'll push a little bit into a little bit of an edge, but the greater our brain tries, the greater we push into those edges, it's like an electric fence almost in our amygdala and limbic system. It says, stop doing that. And that prevents us from really discovering who we truly are. It prevents us from being vulnerable, and in the vulnerability, that's where the magic happens. That's where we discover. That's where we take bold and courageous actions, because we're just trying to stay safe. So there's many reasons why we try to stay safe, but all of those reasons conspire to keep us in stasis. And entrepreneurs are, by their very nature, expansive. However, entrepreneurs are also limited because, and I don't know how deep you want me to go into this here, but I will just say that entrepreneurs are unique in that many of them, and I've worked with probably 500 entrepreneurs over the past 15 years, have had childhood trauma.
So let's just pause. Let's just pause before we go there. And I do want to go there because I think it is important to understand the perspective and the unique wisdom that you're bringing here even more so. But I want to roll things back.
Yeah, let's go.
Because you mentioned this idea of the electric fence. Mm-hmm. And it's like when we bump up against that, as we are naturally expansive as entrepreneurs, we want to expand. That's how we're wired. But then we hit this electric fence and then we bounce back.
We retreat.
You've worked with 500 entrepreneurs. You see the patterns. How does this behavior show up in the coaching that you do? You see the expansion, you see the growth, and then you see the retreat as well. What does this look like, for lack of a better word, clinically?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times when I'm experiencing this edge with entrepreneurs, they will protect themselves and keep themselves insulated. So, for example, a knower's mindset. They'll give a state of the company after a couple poor quarters and present like they have it all figured out. Like things are good, we have a plan moving forward, and what is really needed in that specific situation is being real. This isn't where we want to be. These past couple of quarters have been tough, and I know everybody is knowing that. Everybody is feeling that. And I take personal responsibility for X, Y, and Z. And what I can commit to is we're learning, we're growing. I'm here to listen. You might be seeing things I'm not seeing. We're in this together. So it's that sense, and that can happen on a micro scale. An entrepreneur or founder, in with their leadership team, presenting as if they have it figured out. In vulnerability to exploring those edges that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Also, sometimes I notice and that's what I would call a hyper masculine, which is I got it figured out. I'm right. This is all there is, and that's dramatically limits our scope of expansiveness, our capability of expansiveness. The other side of that is what I would call hyper feminine, which is just going inward and avoiding the conflict, avoiding the challenge, to also maintain invulnerability.
Okay, so we've got this hypermasculine bravado. I know it all. I've got it figured out. But that's a mask. Could be a mask. Most likely is a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Then there's the hyper feminine. That is the avoidant.
That's right.
And we don't want to deal with the situation at hand for a variety of reasons. And this is where, let's go back to where you were leading us here, which is this childhood trauma and this pattern that you see with entrepreneurs. Because I will tell you, like, if I think back of the work that I've had to do on myself, the lack of awareness even, and it's like you keep peeling back the layers of the onion, and it's like you reach one level and you're like, oh, I think I understand, and then you're like, no, I got to go deeper, and you keep going deeper, and then you start finding things that make you feel uncomfortable. But as you and I have been talking, growth never happens in the comfort zone. And this might not even necessarily relate to business growth at first. It's this personal growth that has to be experienced. And then the result of that personal growth is then the business growth and the team growth and all the expansion that happens. But let's go into the cave here together with this childhood trauma and what you're seeing with this.
Yeah. So not everybody is cut out to be an entrepreneur. Some people are born to be an entrepreneur, some aren't. But for those that are, what I've noticed is that their entrepreneurial spirit is forged through childhood adversity. So alcoholic father, oldest out of 4, and they, entrepreneur, realize they need to step up and protect their family, their siblings, the mom, the little brothers and sisters. Out of that, they learn leadership. Out of that, they form a sense of identity. I am a leader. And a story that's associated with leadership. As a leader, I must protect my team. So what does that translate into practice? Well, having it figured out, not acknowledging and admitting vulnerabilities, insecurities, doubts, uncertainties, and fixing and helping. Fixing and helping are good, but fixing and helping are often assuming implicitly that others need help, that others are broken. So unless that awareness of this is my story of what leadership is acknowledged and repaired to greater integrity to who that person authentically is, because right now they're living through the lens of a story that was protective and built up for great reason, and it helped shape the identity of who they are, but now it's limiting them. So only once they acknowledge the story that of themselves, of their identity that they have created and manufactured, and understand the limitations, they will keep creating the conditions in their life that are upholding the thing that they say they don't want. and they are limiting their ability to live in their genius, to live in their unique inborn nature, which is their gift to bring to the world. So that's what I've seen time and time again. And it's kind of that saying, what got you here isn't going to get you there. So I notice a lot of entrepreneurs hit a ceiling, and personally, professionally, within their team, within all their relationships, and those patterns keep showing up until they do the work. And most of us, don't really know how to do the work, and we don't know what the story is, so we're looking through the lens that we need to be looking at. And only once we start looking at that lens can we start doing the uncomfortable work in the shadows, in the edges, to evolve.
What is that uncomfortable work that needs to take place to not look through the lens, but to look at the lens? And perhaps, is it writing a new story? Is that really where this leads us here, to come back to this living and leading with authenticity by leveraging the genius that we all have, but we tend to not honor, see, recognize, respect that genius? Where do we go from here?
Well, you asked a very simple question that actually has kind of a couple sub questions in it.
Sure.
So, as far as what is that thing? Well, it's obviously different for all of us. We have different experiences. We're all different people, and we all have different stories that we have developed, often in adolescence, to protect ourselves. So that's one thing. It's just acknowledging, it would be great if it was, all entrepreneurs who experience adversity, it's about protecting their team. That's not it. For me, it was an aversion to conflict. And I can talk more about how my child...
Yeah, but let's actually unpack that if you're willing to
let's go.
Open this up.
So my parents were the kind of idyllic parents, and everyone would say A, they're amazing parents, and B, they're just so in love. And all the other couples would want to be like my parents. And for, the first decade of my life, I definitely felt that, and was, really grateful and felt very safe and supported. And then almost overnight, I think it was 15 years old, my mom went downstairs. We were at the dinner table. It was me, my mom, my dad, my brother. My mom went downstairs and didn't really think anything of it. We were finishing up dinner. And then all of a sudden, we had a laundry room down there. And I heard banging, slamming. She was slamming the top of the dryer down and just screaming. And this had never happened in our house before. So my dad got up from the dinner table. He looked at my brother and me and said, "Stay here." He went downstairs. I immediately followed him. And then he was at the threshold of our laundry room. And my mom was just screaming, "I hate you," over and over again. My dad looked at me. He had tears in his eyes. And we never unpacked what happened. But what subsequently followed was my parents were what I thought, profoundly in love. And then they were overnight separated. So what happened before that incident was I never experienced conflict. Everything was good. And then what happened after that was I never experienced conflict. Everything was off. So when I started my first business, it was at a point, it was an inflection point, and it was failing. And I was in a mediator's office with my business partner, and she asked me, how did you learn conflict? And I didn't even know what that question meant. And then she continued, what did you experience when you were a child around conflict? And everything connected with me. In that I didn't. I learned that either everything was okay, or if you had conflict, it would ruin everything that you cared about. Now, that's not a rational story. That's obviously not true, and doesn't make any sense unless you're me in that situation, and it makes perfect sense. So the story I learned in that moment when I was 15 was avoid conflict at all costs, because you will lose the thing that you care most about. So what happened was I avoided conflict at all costs, and I continued to lose the most important things in my life: relationships, the business. And in that moment, it was an inflection point to me that helped me understand, unless I go back and I acknowledge the way that I learned conflict is not of service. I need a new story. I need a new belief schema. And then I started repatterning that. And that led me to a deep dive that guided my path in the subsequent 10 years since that last business failed, about being curious around conflict. And what I've discovered over the past 10 years has not only like changed and evolved my life and my comprehensive definition of success, but many others that I work with. And it's a really powerful kind of sacred work that we can do. It's really hard, but it's really liberating at the same time.
It's so interesting, and I'm gonna be honest. Like I got a little emotional. I tried to like not get teary, but when you were telling that story, because it resonated with me, and it brought me back. Very similar pattern, because growing up it was me and my brother.
Mm-hmm.
Thought I had the perfect family, perfect parents. Because all you know as a kid is what you see.
That's right.
And your contextual framework at that point is your friends. My parents, they never fought. They never raised their voice. Maybe my mom raised my voice at me because I'm just wired differently. But between my parents, I never really saw any conflict whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Until I was 18. And whenever I was 18, my mom had been going to therapy and came across a letter from doing some therapy writing. Found out my dad had an affair. And that was and had an affair when she was pregnant with me. So I'm 18 years old, senior in high school. And it was like my entire narrative was just completely shattered in an instant.
That's right.
But even through their experience, never saw conflict. But then I started to question. It was like, well, what's the story behind the story? What is it that I can't see? What is it that I don't know? Like all of these things that are happening, more probably subconsciously than anything.
Oh yeah, way more subconsciously. And that's the thing.
Yeah. And ended up putting a hole in the wall in the family room.
Yeah.
with all of this. And that was just a real rough period of time. And my parents were going through therapy and they had reconciled and whatnot, but it was just, I didn't have a model for conflict resolution myself either. Mm-hmm. I was very confused. And so anytime conflict would come, it was like it was this avoidance thing.
Right.
And so as I started my entrepreneurial journey, it's like, and I started to grow my team 15, 20 years ago. And we were growing very quickly, but I was probably more paying for friends, and for affirmation and for things that I was missing and longing for, than making the hard choices, the hard decisions, having the hard conversations that really needed to happen. It took actually my wife confronting me and saying it's the business or the family. And it was funny too, when we got married, like my wife is Lebanese and grew up in an entrepreneurial home, very loud, a lot of conflict, but a lot of conflict resolution. And even when my wife and I were going through marriage preparation, there was a whole session around conflict resolution. It's like you get it academically, you get it theoretically, but then to put it into practice. So I feel you on this.
That's it. And you raised, first of all, thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad that that story resonated with you and was evocative for you. There's something also that's really unique when we are children, in that we are so, regardless of, how like strong-willed we are so fragile and we are so impressionable. And the things that we experience, just even if you have two parents or a parent who's incredibly loving, just living in this world, there's trauma. And we as children have, and as adults, but accentuated as children, have a primary motivation: safety, and secondary, love. And those weave together. We want safety and we want love. And like you were saying, affirmation. We want to know we're accepted. We want to know we're good enough. We want to know we're liked. Because all those things in our story, I'm safe. I've got a tribe. I'm here. So when we're not aware of what's happening, and you're right, there's 373 subconscious motivators that are firing at all times, guiding who we are, our story about who we are and how we're showing up in the world. So until we understand that we're deploying strategies that we learned as a child to keep us safe then, but we're still deploying them now, even though we're in a different context, we aren't able to connect those dots. And what Jung said, he has this quote I love: until we make the subconscious conscious, something like, it will continue to dictate our life, and we will call it fate. And so often the entrepreneurs I work with say, well, that's just how I'm wired. Being wired a certain way and feeling like you're wired a certain way are very different things. And through conflict and unpacking that conflict, we move beyond conflict resolution, where we resolve the conflict. Then we enter a realm of conflict transformation.
Bingo.
Where we use the conflict to evolve who we are as humans. And of course that translates into a better lover, a better leader, a better friend. But we gotta look at the lens.
Look at the lens and not through the lens. And that's the pattern that I'm hearing you can come back to. Look at the lens, see things differently, because one of the things that I wrote about in Banking on Change, and you were even touching on this before, there are 4 steps that I have observed that lead to human transformation. Because if I think about the work that I've done over the years, particularly framed around digital anthropology or brand anthropology, it's the intersection of marketing and sales and tech and human behavior. And the first step that leads, and within organizations, you often hear digital transformation, brand transformation, culture transformation, sales transformation. I'm like, those are all great in theory. But what has to either proceed or coincide to achieve one of those or multiple transformations within an organization? And it's human transformation.
That's right.
And that starts oftentimes with the leader. In the context of our conversation, that's the entrepreneur.
That's right.
Because when that individual transformation transpires, that's when you move to the team. And then the team transforms. But the teams are also made up of individuals, so you have all these other transformations that have to happen at the individual level, the team level. And And when teams transform, that's when the organization continues to transform. And so the first step in human transformation is to simply see things from a different perspective. Look at the lens, not through the lens.
That's it. And that's so hard. That's so hard because as we're starting to take the lens off, we're rudderless. All of those stories that we created that kept us safe and that helped us form our identity, which often had a lot of value in us getting to where we are. We risk, the story we tell ourselves is we risk losing that. Even, and this sounds so crazy, but even just to take off the lens with which you see through, to look at the lens, that is incredibly threatening. And the ego or whatever, the sense of identity says, no, 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 and creates all these stories why you should keep that lens on. You're going to lose all the things that you work so hard to get to. And that's why it's so hard to do this work. And most of us, like you were saying, most of us don't know how to do this. We lack a methodology to how to do it effectively.
I think let's go there, because we've really unpacked why this happens, what it shows up symptomatically as. Now, how do we move beyond? Because you said a methodology. Mm-hmm. And I'm very big on methodologies, because I think methodologies clarify a path forward. They provide a path forward, whether it's a method, a framework, a process, a system. It's here's what to do next. Once you have awareness, once you see you're looking at the lens and not through the lens, here's where you can go from here.
Yeah. Great. I know. And it's like a lot of times we like hear these things. We're like, yes, of course. I know. I need that. I want that. But it's like, but how do you do that?
Yeah.
So there are two things, two kind of key methodologies. One is to have productive conflict. And the second methodology is how do you take productive conflict, conduct a post-mortem, identify self-limiting beliefs, and restory those. So both of those are important in this process. So, yeah, like you said, we don't learn this. We get married, we have like a workshop on conflict. So first, let me just define what productive conflict is. So there are two different types of destructive conflict. One is what I would call hyper-masculine, where we're attacking each other, we're valuing the task and dismissive of the relationship. Mm-hmm. The other I would say is hyper-feminine, where we're overvaluing the relationship. I don't want to say something that's going to hurt your feelings. I'm just not going to say anything. We protect the relationship, and we actually create the conditions for the least amount of safety when we do that, because nobody knows where anyone stands.
Can I pause you real fast on the destructive conflict to just come back for context here, because it's something I was hearing earlier, the hypermasculine and the hyperfeminine. So the hypermasculine is attacking, the hyperfeminine comes back to the avoidance. And I'm curious, you've brought this up before and then you bring it up again, the masculine and the feminine. Why is that important to surface? Because, one of the things that I've been really thinking a lot about is masculine and feminine energies and how they can complement. But if you over-index in one, then you get into, for example, the attacking of the hypermasculine. If you over-index in the hyperfeminine, then you get into the avoidance. Can you, before we keep going, because that's the destructive conflict. Right. Can we provide more context
Absolutely.
into the?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yeah, so this is probably the biggest kind of pushback that I get on my work is around the masculine and feminine. And what I have is often a lot of men saying, you want me to be more like a woman. And that's absolutely not what I'm talking about. So each of us have masculine and feminine energies in us. So let me just define. Masculine, outward, structure, about achievement, outspoken, bold, confident, often really great things. So there's unhealthy and there's healthy. Yeah. Same with feminine. The healthy feminine, intuitive, introspective, pausing, reflection, relational. And we as humans, especially leaders, would benefit by understanding those energetics and being fluid in between those energetics, depending on the context in which we're in. So there are times for the healthy masculine and structure and achievement and movement, and there are times for the healthy feminine, pausing, reflecting, listening. What is my intuition saying right now? Not what is the chatter telling me I should do, but what's my soul telling me I should do. So in the context of conflict, I mean, that's I didn't come up with this. Ancient Chinese yin and yang, this has been around for 5,000 years and probably before that. But these are just dynamic energetics that exist within all of us. And there's other language you can use. And if you feel like another language, then great, go with the language that works for you.
But I'm glad you provided that perspective, because I do think it's helpful. If we haven't heard this before, I think you're already addressing where you get some of the pushback, but once you provide that additional context, to me, it makes a lot of sense. And that's the destructive side. Once again, that's the attacking on the hypermasculine, and it's the avoidance on the hyperfeminine. So that's the destructive conflict. What does the healthy?
Healthy. I mean, that's the language I use. Yeah. Healthy masculine, healthy feminine.
Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like a lot of things. So I can give you a story of one of my clients, of a man who is living a healthy feminine. So he has a son who's a phenomenal runner, competitive runner, 18 years old. Went to the nationals, won the nationals in the 800, won the nationals in the 400, and came in second on his 4x4 team. He was livid. He was heartbroken. He thought they should have won. He was punching walls, kicking fences, came home, and the mom and dad were there, and he was just kind of, upset, visibly upset, and being vocal about it. And his mom just started leaning into him. You cannot talk like that. There's no place like that. You got to get your emotions under control. Unhealthy masculine, embodied by the mom. And the dad just walked over and hugged him and held him. And the son just started weeping. And then the son and the dad just sat on the couch, and the dad put the arm over the shoulder of the son, and the son just said, "I thank you, Dad. Thank you. Thank you," over and over again as he cried. So that's an embodiment of the healthy feminine. In that moment, that was appropriate. This kid's heart is breaking. Whether or not you think it should be or not, that's what's happening. What he needed to know in that moment was that he was safe, he was loved, he was held, he was okay, accepted for all of the things he was and was feeling, and that needed to be embraced. So that's just one example. It's funny because now everything that I do, I'm like, unhealthy masculine, unhealthy feminine. I just see through that lens, and I realize when we are in our greatest expression, there's integrity, there's wholeness of who we are, and we can't deny any of that. But our society, and this is a whole nother podcast, but society often marginalizes different elements of those healthy energetics.
Yeah. That's so helpful. Let's come back then to the methodologies here to move beyond, to get back to the genius through and with conflict.
Great. So the first step is, how do we have productive conflict? So productive conflict values both the task, the content of what we're talking about, and the relationship concurrently. Oftentimes when we have destructive, we value the content or the relationship. And that's going to be destructive content. It's going to be ineffective conflict. So that's kind of the lens. And then the first step, and this is adapted from nonviolent communication, this process. So it's really about owning your own experience in conflict, staying away from analysis, staying away from projecting on what the other person is doing or thinking. It's about owning your own experience. So the first step is understanding, where are we on the same page? Finding a shared objective where you and I can stand shoulder to shoulder and say, look, I think both of us would love to, find harmony when I'm going away for a business trip and you are here and we are finding a way to make this work. Am I right? Yes. Yeah, I would love to get there, whatever. I'm just, illustrating. So, okay, great. So we establish this mutual purpose, which creates a sense of safety in that we're not adversaries anymore. We're now collaborators. Not to say like, oh, it's all easy and rainbows and roses coming from here on, but we've set the conditions where we're on the same team working for a shared objective. So then we're in a conflict because something happened, right? We don't get into spontaneous conflict for no reason. So something happened. We need to know, and a lot of productive conflict is about orienting the other person to what's going on. Because so often, remember, we have all these stories of what is, and we believe that's what is, but it's not. That's our story. The reality is often quite different, oftentimes quite different than the story in which we're telling ourselves. So the first step is identifying what exactly happened. So very specific facts that a video camera could capture. When I said this, you rolled your eyes, and then I said this, and you yelled XYZ. So someone would be like, yes, that happened, right? It's indisputable. So then the next step is there's a story that we came up with. The story that came up to me when you raised your voice is, I'm not respected. That I do all this work and I'm not seen and you don't respect me. And then we get into the emotions. I feel sad. And then when we can really dig into those emotions and really understand, there's something called emotional fluency, we become great at telling stories and helping the other person orient and helping ourselves orient to what's really going on here. So I feel disrespected. I feel unloved. I feel alone. Like, that's so much more powerful than I feel sad, right? It tells such a grander, contextual, complex, nuanced story. So getting in touch with those emotions. And then the reality is I probably have a need that's not being met. So it's my responsibility to understand, what is the need that I have that's not being met? I have a need for connection. And then the next and last step is, how might I ask for something, make a request that would meet that need moving forward? So, moving forward, before you're leaving on your business trip, I'm inverting this example, but before you're leaving on this business trip, would you be open to us going out to dinner the night before or going for a walk the night before? I think that would meet my need and giving me this sense of connection, because right now I'm feeling disconnected and untethered, and and then we open it up to a conversation. And then the other person probably might have a need that's not being met. So they go through that process. And what we're doing is we're taking responsibility for our experience. And we're sharing the things that happened, the story that we created, the emotions associated with it, the need we have that's not being met. And then we work to meet each other's needs. And that's how we resolve the conflict. That's different than, we get in a fight, I get you flowers, you say I forgive you, and inevitably we repeat the same fight 2 weeks later.
The lesson will continue until the lesson is learned.
That's right. And it will amplify.
It'll get even louder
until we hear it. And sometimes that comes at catastrophic consequence. A marriage ending, a business failing, a relationship with a child being severed because the volume kept getting turned up, but we were so resistant to looking at the lens. So that's part one. Part two is, what is the methodology for taking that conflict and using it to evolve as a human?
Transformation,
right. So moving from conflict resolution to conflict transformation. So, using my example, I would either be in the hyper feminine, most of the time conflict avoidant, or the hyper masculine or unhealthy masculine, where I would just be like, why are we like blow up? Why is this happening? So say I go through this process, I understand I have some needs that are not being met. I start to ask, like, why are these things so important to me? Why are they so wrapped in emotion? And it's so peaked whenever we talk about this thing. So we need to understand what happened and then ask yourself, how would you ideally, perfect world, now that you're not in a peak emotional triggered state, how would you have responded? Don't worry about if it's realistic. Just like rub the magic lamp and this is how you do it. I would have said this. Okay, cool. Understand what is the belief that I was using that caused me to respond in the way that I responded. And this can feel like totally something. My belief was all conflict is bad. And if someone were to ask me, do you think that? No, of course I don't think that. But that was the belief that was guiding me. So questioning what would we do in the ideal state, and then what would be a belief that would guide that different behavior. And this is a practice. It's not just like, oh, I go through these 4 steps and I'm a new person.
Right, you just don't do it. It's not a one and done.
It's not a one and done. And a lot of this work is done in relationship, and that's why doing this work with a leadership team is really great. That's why doing this work with a partner is really great. So we understand what is the belief that would have guided my actions, in that ideal state, and then understand that. And then if I were to live that, what would I be sacrificing? So we really need to go into the what am I giving up? Because if we're just doing this intellectual activity and like, oh yeah, this belief would be better, we're lacking the context, and the context really, really matters. So we need to understand what are we giving up, and then what can we do that will make this new belief sticky? Like really looking at, okay, path A, I live by the current flawed belief. Path B, I live by a more intentionally designed belief. How will that affect my team? How will that affect my leadership? How will that affect my relationship with my child? And we start to materialize that into the future. And then we realize how much pain we're experiencing by living this flawed belief, by living aligned with this story that maybe served us for protection at some point in our life, but no longer serves us. So through this very process, we start the practice of looking at the lens. And just like any practice, like we go to the gym one time, workout, I'm one and done, right? So we just 2% better over time. That compounds in a month, in a year, in 3 years. We can have systemic transformation and liberation. And then what happens is really cool, because not only are we living more greatly aligned with our genius, but then we start having reverberating effects. Our team, like you were saying, our spouse, our children. And we create permission for them to do this courageous work.
Yeah.
As we model it, starting with vulnerability, starting with integrity. And that's why I'm on this planet.
I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate how you reframed, even in my own mind, conflict resolution, which was my belief. You have now you're helping me see things differently. It's not just conflict resolution is step 1. Conflict transformation, that's the progression here. Mm-hmm. That leads to reverberation. And also for sharing this to help other entrepreneurs level up themselves as a leader. What can one who has made it this far in our conversation do next? Something small that they can create momentum, that they can take action to move forward with courage. One small thing. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I would say probably the most significant thing let's just say in conflict, because we can go in a lot of different directions, but one thing in conflict, and it's hard, but it's incredibly powerful. As we start to engage in conflict, we're going from our limbic system, our neocortex, which is our thinking brain, and we start, and sometimes it can happen very fast, dropping down into, the amygdala, the fight, flight, and and the limbic system of our brain, which is more emotional and reactive. The number one most significant thing anyone can do as we're starting on that path, pause. Pause. Say, take a breath and say, what emotion am I feeling right now? And really get clear on that emotion and then share that emotion. That's it. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling ashamed. Whatever it is. But the pause is the thing that creates the space. So the pause is the masculine structure that creates the space for the feminine emergence. Pausing. Pause. What am I feeling? And then once we have oriented within ourselves, we're regrounded and we can get to the real issue.
I like that. We're regrounded. We can get to the real issue. Thank you for the unique wisdom, your unique wisdom that you have shared today, Matthew. I'm so grateful for you. And if there's someone who is watching, they're listening, and they want to connect with you and continue the conversation that we've started, what's the best way for them to reach out and say hello to you?
Yeah. They can call me, text me, 646-709-6075. You can put that in the show notes, whatever. I'm happy to chat with anyone. Or email me, matthew.abrams@eosworldwide.com.
Connect with Matthew, learn with Matthew. Matthew, thanks for joining me for another episode of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, JR. I loved every minute.
And if you want to continue to level up on your journey of growth, you can also text me 832-240-1922, and I will send you a copy of my best-selling book, Banking on Change, because there is a lot of change going on right now, and you don't have to take this journey alone. Text me 832-240-1922, and I will text you a copy of Banking on Change.